Good evening. Welcome to the 2011 Borah Symposium. My name is Lee Vierling. I'm a faculty member in the University of Idaho College of Natural Resources, and I'm also a member of this year's Borah Symposium Committee. And it is an honor tonight to represent the committee as we welcome tonight's distinguished speaker, President Oscar Arias. This year marks 74 years since the first Borah Foundation-sponsored program, which featured an address by then First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. It also marks the 64th consecutive annual Borah Symposium, dating from 1948, when an event was titled "The Causes of War and the Conditions for Peace." Tonight's speaker carries that theme into the present day. We have many people to thank for making tonight possible. The Borah Foundation Committee wishes to sincerely thank the following groups for their support of the 2011 Symposium. Thank you to University Communication and Marketing, the College of Graduate Studies, the Runstad Lecture Series, the Martin Institute, the IGERT Project designed to support doctoral research in Idaho and Costa Rica, the Environmental Science Program, the College of Law, the College of Natural Resources, the Office of Diversity and Human Rights, the Women's Center. We also thank the Departments of English, the Department of Foreign Languages and Literatures, the Department of Political Science, the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, the School of Journalism and Mass Media, and the Martin School of International Studies for their support of this year's symposium. In addition, earlier this evening, the Office of the President sponsored a reception for symposium participants, from which we're very grateful. While the Vista Corporation and the Center for Forest Nursery and Seedling Research sponsored a tree planting earlier this evening in honor of President Oscar Arias Snchez in the U of I Presidential Grove. And speaking of presidents, it is now my pleasure to introduce to you, to the podium, the President of the University of Idaho, Dr. Duane Nellis. President Nellis and his wife Ruthie came to the University of Idaho in 2009, bringing with him a wide array of experiences in both administration and faculty service from Kansas State University and West Virginia University. And fittingly for tonight's speaker, President Nellis developed his professional career through studying landscapes and mapping large land use areas, using images collected via satellite from space. This is the same kind of imagery that today is being used to help monitor the status and the health of rural areas and ecosystems worldwide, including countries that are rich in natural resources, such as Costa Rica. So please help me welcome President Nellis, who will now introduce tonight's distinguished speaker.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and welcome to all of you and to our honored guests and friends of the university. You know, human security is a new name for an old range of problems that have been complicated by our continuing changing world. Human suffering through aggression, crime, and neglect are still a challenge in our modern era. In 1929, Chicago attorney Salmon Levinson established the William Edgar Borah Outlawry of War Foundation at the University of Idaho to honor and continue the work of Idaho Senator William Borah on behalf of peace. We use the shorthand name of the Borah Foundation now, but the cause today is more relevant than ever. Tonight's speaker seems to share many of Senator Borah's traits: a commitment to make positive change, a willingness to preserve even when things seem impossible, and persevere, a commitment to peace for the benefit of people even when it raises the ire of powerful, moneyed interests. He holds a PhD from the University of Essex, and as well as nearly 50 honorary doctorates. He has won many awards for service to humanity, and you can read through those in the program tonight, such as the Albert Schweitzer Prize for Humanitarianism. However, his most notable trait that made these possible may be his unrelenting drive to make the world a better and safer place. President Oscar Arias is the only person in Costa Rica's history to have served 2 terms as president. In his time as president, he set his efforts to both helping his nation, but also helping his region and the world. One of the first things he did to upset the powerful interests was to work to restructure Costa Rica's economy that relied on traditional coffee and banana plantations. Instead, he encouraged the development of non-traditional agriculture that benefited the country's economy and ecology. This includes the production, for example, of the sale of exotic flowers and fruits, as well as increased efforts in tourism in Costa Rica. And Ruthie and I have had the opportunity on 2 occasions to visit Costa Rica and see the wonderful diversity of Costa Rica and the wonderful people that are part of Costa Rica. The resulting income from his efforts helped his country improve the lives of its citizens, to include the efforts to improve education and increase literacy. This is one of the reasons I think that President Arias finds common ground with another of our distinguished guests, CATIE General Director Jose Campos, who's with us tonight, who spoke earlier today about the environment and human security. CATIE is the Spanish acronym for the Tropical Agricultural Research and Higher Education Center based in Costa Rica. It oversees nearly 100 research development projects in 17 different Latin American countries. CATIE and the University of Idaho also share ties, especially through our joint doctoral program in which we partner to supervise students, most through the NSF IGERT grant that was mentioned earlier. It's a cooperative program like this that both CATIE and President Arias are known for. In fact, it was his ability to build consensus that led to the award of the Nobel Prize in 1987. President Arias took on a task in Central America that others said was impossible. Those of us that lived through that period of time remember the turmoil that was part of Central America. What soon became known as the Arias Plan pushed Central American leaders to limit the size of their armies, promote basic human rights, and hold open elections. He was absolutely instrumental in getting all of Central America presidents to sign the procedure to establish a firm and lasting peace in Central America in 1987. However, he stayed active in promoting this effort until the last conflict ended in Guatemala in 1996. Given the opportunity and resources available when not engaged in war, President Arias has worked to reduce poverty and improve education throughout the region. Not only is this an amazing accomplishment that promoted peace and human rights, it's something we can all learn from. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's truly a pleasure to introduce and recognize this outstanding individual and guest of the University of Idaho. Let's all welcome President Oscar Arias.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. My dear friends, I have had the good fortune more than once in my life to walk in the footsteps of great men and women. I have had the chance to stand at podiums where I could feel the presence and the pressure of those who once spoke from that same platform. When my predecessors in a certain place are fellow advocates for peace, that pressure is stronger still. For we live in a world where force is too often valued over reason. We live in a world in which violence is too often chosen over diplomacy. We live in a world in which the voice of dialogue too often becomes the voice that cries out in the wilderness. Those of us whose message of peace manages to find a single listener, let alone a hall full of people, are a lucky few. That is why it is so important that the words of those who have gone before us are not forgotten. To paraphrase Isaac Newton, we can only see farther if we stand on the shoulders of giants. Only through the perspective of the past can we confront the conundrums of the present, such as the difficult questions you have called me here to address. What does human security really mean? How has that changed in this 21st century? And what can we do to achieve it? The words of the past that I turn to tonight are those of William Borah himself, the man whose name graces this symposium and whose struggle for peace inspired it. On November 19, 1919, in the continuing aftermath of the First World War, he delivered a speech before the U.S. Senate in opposition to the League of Nations. He believed that the treaty would damage the sovereignty of the United States and other countries, and that it granted certain nations too much power. He warned against the erroneous belief that force is, after all, the true foundation upon which must rest all stable governments. He urged his listeners to keep alive our belief in the moral purposes and self-governing capacity of the people. And he said, "Is there any guarantee of peace other than the control of the war-making power of the people? The people in whose keeping alone you can safely lodge the power of peace or war have no voice in this scheme." The specifics of Senator Borah's speech are no part of the distant past, but it contains a message that is still revolutionary today. He speaks to us here across nearly a century to help us answer our questions on human security. Just imagine, in a world still shaken by the worst violence it has ever faced, he said that force is not the true foundation of stability. He said that human nature is inherently capable of moral self-governance. Most importantly of all, he said that the power to maintain or destroy peace in a democracy is wielded only by ordinary citizens. It all depends on their control of the war-making power. This approach turns much of conventional thinking about security on its head. It flies in the face of the prevailing view that security can be ensured by soldiers and weapons, by barracks and bunkers. That security can only be ensured by building a wall between one country and another. That security is the exclusive territory of presidents, generals, and soldiers. According to Senator Borah, human security depends on humans themselves. I believe he was right, and my country is living proof. When I was a child, Costa Rica endured a civil war, province against province, cousin against cousin. When the war ended in 1948, Costa Rica made a voluntary decision that no other country had ever undertaken, to abolish its army and declare peace to the world. By doing this, my country fundamentally altered its landscape forever. My country promised me and all its children that we would never see tanks or troops in our streets. My country promised me and all its children that it would invest not in the weapons of our past, but in the tools of our future. not in barracks, but in schools, hospitals, and national parks. Not in soldiers, but in teachers, doctors, and guard parks. My country promised to dismantle the institutions of violence and invest in the progress that makes violence unnecessary. Quite simply, my country invested in its people. The start of our story of peace was the abolition of the army and the renunciation of the use of force. But the reason that decision is still standing 6 decades later is that we have used the dividends of peace to create a healthy, educated, and free people. The Costa Ricans of my generation, who look on when our government made history, have had the chance to lead healthy and prosperous lives, as have our children and grandchildren. The people of my country are taught by their families and by their government that security does not lie in weapons or fences or armies. Security lies exclusively in human development. I return to our first question of the evening. How can we define human security? What constitutes it? With some help from the past and with the example of my country, we can see that it is defined by people. People who are healthy, people who are fed, people who are educated. Then and only then will we have true security. For if war and peace in the world are within the control of its people, we must rely on them to make good decisions. And that cannot happen if they are sick, hungry, and ignorant. Gandhi explained this when he said that there are people in the world so hungry that God cannot appear to them except in the form of bread. When basic human needs are not met, the victims of this neglect might not become perpetrators of violence, but they are certainly less prepared to survive, oppose, or end it. Achieving and sustaining human security is a matter of human well-being. Here we come to our second question of the night. If this is how we define human security, what does that mean in the 21st century? How have the challenges to security changed in the 92 years since Borah made his speech, or the 63 years since Costa Rica abolished its army? We can begin with good news. Without a doubt, one of the biggest changes in the past century, or even in the past half-century, is our power to improve the lot of humanity. John F. Kennedy's inaugural address famously stated that man holds in his mortal hands the power to abolish all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life. If that was true in 1961, it is certainly true today. Now more than ever, we have the resources and the knowledge to feed the hungry, heal the needlessly sick, and educate all our children. We live in times of upheaval and danger, but also of unprecedented possibility. The bad news is that we have not used that power. And because it is within our reach to end so much suffering, our failure, no, our refusal to do so becomes all the more egregious. Neither the end of the Cold War, neither the end of the world wars, not the end of the Cold War has freed the human race from its obsession with weapons. We have been distracted by needless violence and by unrestricted trafficking of arms, by human rights violations, and by the insane escalation of military spending for wars that don't even exist. Global military expenditure reached $1.63 trillion last year, representing 2.6% of the world's GDP. My home region of Latin America managed to claim nearly $63 billion of that sum, while remaining one of the most violent and economically unequal regions in the world, with almost, as you all know, 200 million of its inhabitants living in poverty. Of course, these figures are dwarfed by the expenditures of the United States, responsible for nearly half of the world's spending. U.S. defense spending is increased by 70% between 2001 and 2009 in a world where 925 million people go to bed hungry every night and 16,000 children die every day of hunger-related causes. Let me be clear. I am the first to admit that drastic military reductions are not in every country's future. But as we have seen, a comprehensive approach to security cannot postpone attention to the world's neediest people. The widespread refusal to see any connection between human desperation and our security problems themselves is a kind of willful blindness. Confronting this wall of numbers can make one feel powerless. It is easy to feel that the sheer size of these defense budgets gives them an unstoppable force. But nothing is inevitable if we are willing to contemplate the possibility of change. Just think of what we could achieve with a fraction of those funds. If the world reduces military spending by 1/4, we could buy 1.9 billion computers from one laptop per child. That means that not just every child in Costa Rica, not just every child in Latin America, but every child in the developing world would walk into his classroom tomorrow and find his own laptop waiting for him. Let us say that 25% reduction seems too extreme. If the world reduces military spending by just 10%, we could provide monthly scholarships like those I instituted in Costa Rica to keep kids in school to 153 million high-risk young people for an entire year. Is 10% still too much? Well, with a reduction of just 5%, we could buy enough mosquito nets to protect the entire population of the developing world from malaria 3 times over. With a reduction of just 1 armored helicopter, we could provide school lunches for thousands of children throughout elementary school. With a reduction of just 1 combat plane, we could protect dozens of square miles of primary forest. And with the reduction of just 1 soldier's salary, we could pay for at least 1 English teacher. With the smallest percentages, changes most of us would never even feel, we could equip all homes with electricity, achieve universal literacy, and eradicate all preventable diseases. Those, my friends, are the dividends of peace. That is what we would gain if we put an end to our Russian roulette of military spending. A disaster that moved the entire world in 2010 provides the most shocking example of all. We could not have prevented the earthquake and hurricanes in Haiti, but we could have prevented what followed. With just 1/5 of 1% of world military spending, that's 0.2%, we could in the past year have built a safe home for every single family in Haiti left homeless by the earthquake, provided clean drinking water for every single Haitian, thus preventing the cholera epidemic, built a brand new hospital through Partners in Health, fed a hot meal to all of Haiti's children every single day, and put all of those children through a year of school. We all lament poor Haiti's suffering, but that suffering only continues because of the world's wrong priorities. One of my other predecessors here, Eleanor Roosevelt, once asked, "When will our consciences grow so tender that we will act to prevent human misery rather than to avenge it?" I'm afraid that we must answer her, not yet, not yet. Some argue that we would risk too much by cutting our militaries. The fact is, we risk much more by staying the same. Our world is made more dangerous, not less, by those who value profits over principles. It is made more dangerous, not less, by the sea of arms flowing unrestricted into developing countries. It is made more dangerous, not less, by cruel and perverse investment choices that neglect the poor, the sick, and our planet itself. Our commitment to violence is not a matter of necessity. It is a matter of will. So the final question before us tonight is, what can be done? Or, more to the point, what can we do? We have seen that human security depends on humans themselves. And those of us gathered here tonight are among the most powerful people on earth, for we have a voice and a vote. We can make changes. We can use any platform we gain, any ear we can bend, any ballot we can cast to make a difference in the out-of-control military spending that plagues our globe. Costa Rica's choice to abolish its army made sense for Costa Rica, but reductions on some level make sense for all nations. Force cannot, my friends, sustain the peace. We can ensure that a comprehensive and binding arms trade treaty is passed by the United Nations. This effort, which I have led for more than a decade, would prohibit the transfer of arms to states, groups, or individuals if sufficient reason exists to believe that those arms will be used to violate human rights or international law. The destructive power of the 640 million small arms and light weapons that exist in the world, most in the hands of civilians, deserves the same or even more attention than military spending. During my last administration, thanks to the support of like-minded nations around the globe, the treaty was taken under consideration by the United Nations. It is in their hands, but watchful eyes could make a difference to its success or failure. We can encourage countries to make smart investment choices that favor development. Another project of my recent administration, the Costa Rica Consensus, would create mechanisms to forgive debts and use international financial resources to support developing nations that spend more on environmental protection, education, healthcare, and housing for the people, and less on arms and soldiers. It would change the way international aid is distributed. It would end that ridiculous policies that punish countries like my own when they make good choices and reward corrupt or misguided governments that create conflict and deprivation. It would support the institutions of democracy that make it possible for people to control the war-making power of their countries. It would make a real difference in some of the most dangerous and conflict-ridden nations on earth. In short, it is an idea whose time has come, but it needs international support from every quarter if it is to prevail. We can use the extraordinary technology at our disposal to increase our power. There may have been debate about just how large a role social networking has played in the Arab Spring, but there can be no debate about the fact that these tools have incredible power. The pen is mightier than the sword, but Facebook could be even mightier than the pen. The next social movement that will make a difference for peace tomorrow, next week, or next year might start anywhere. It might start from a computer in a dorm at the University of Idaho. It might start from the cell phone in your pocket. I spoke at the beginning of my remarks about how hard it can be for voices for peace to be heard. In this new century, we have new ways to influence the course of history. There is one final thing we can do, and it is something that must begin in our classrooms and universities, in our centers of higher learning. We must teach our young people not to dismiss peacemakers as dreamers, as Quixotes, as idealists, as fanciful stargazers out of touch with reality. Without a doubt, peace can seem like a dream, though it's a dream worth having. But those of us who argue that human security demands a different path for humankind are not the dreamers in this scenario. The dreamers are those who believe that a bullet or a wall can put an end to conflict. The naives are those who claim that peace ends with a white flag. The people out of touch with reality are those who think that investing in humankind is something we should do after wars end, not something we must do in order to end our wars. Albert Einstein defined insanity, this is a very well-known definition of insanity, as doing something, the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We humans have been waging wars throughout our history. Proposing alternatives is then not foolish. It is the only sane approach. I urge each of you to keep that idea in your heart, to challenge the insanity you might encounter, to defend your scholars' right to question, to probe, to explore, It is the only way to change the path that others would have us follow. My dear friends, I'm so grateful to the Borah Foundation and to the University of Idaho for inviting me here tonight to meet an extraordinary group of students, professors, and friends. And I am grateful to have visited a very special place, your presidential grove. I have referred to the importance of listening to those who have gone before us. Nowhere do we feel our forebears' presence more strongly than we do in the shade of a tree they left behind. To plant a tree, they say, is the maximum act of faith. Faith that the seed will entrust to the ground, faith that the seed we entrust to the ground will make its way, slowly and carefully, towards the sky. Faith that those who follow us will nurture and protect our small contribution to the world. Faith that the action we take today will someday benefit people we may never meet. So to visit a place where Eleanor Roosevelt planted her tree in 1948 and where other peacemakers have followed her example is to visit a sacred place. It is a place where people took their visions for the future and entrusted them to the ground. Such places are found not only in beautiful spots like this, they are all over the world, including the planet's most lonely and dangerous terrain, on battlefields, in refugee camps, in slums, and at the gravesites of the fallen. Ordinary men and women have had the strength and courage to plant their seeds of peace in the ground, hoping beyond hope that they will one day be allowed to flourish. These seeds are never abandoned. The people who planted them keep them in their hearts, imagining that the roots will grow strong and true, that the branches will stretch out over a better world. They imagine that the children who play in their shade will know only harmony, sow only friendship, and reap only peace. From Israel and Palestine, they send out their most fervent prayers, even when they pass through the darkest night. From Iraq and Afghanistan, they send out their hopes, even when they must face the most terrible storm. From the places the world has neglected and forgotten, they send out their pleas, even when they find no resting place. These mothers and fathers do not call out in vain. I know that one day those pleas and prayers will find a place to land. I know that one day the goodness of humanity will finally prevail. I know that one day we will make the wise decisions that can coax those seeds from the ground and make of them a mighty tree. On that day, all those hopes will come home victorious, like the dove that flew across the ancient flood with an olive branch clutched in its beak. They will bear a sign of new life, a sign of troubles ended, a sign that our children are safe at last. And we will know that peace has calmed the winds, that peace has stilled the waters, that peace, in all its glory, has brought forth a new future for humanity. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, President Arias. On behalf of the Borah Symposium Committee, I just want to extend my very deepest thanks for you traveling to Idaho to give this talk, and also to explain to the audience that due to President Arias' voice, we will not, unfortunately, be able to do a question and answer period tonight, and President Arias is very sorry that he cannot do that. But again, it's my privilege to wrap up the evening by telling you that I think that Borah himself would feel that your talk was very much in the spirit of his words and his life, and I think in the spirit of the human condition as well. Thank you all, and good night.